Hello everyone, my name is James Unknown, and today I'll be talking about Eisenhower and the beginning of the space race. The space race began in earnest in July 1955. The Eisenhower administration announced that they were planning on launching artificial satellites during the International Geophysical Year. It would be called Project Vanguard, and would be held by the Naval Research Laboratory and directed by John P. Hagen. A few days later, the Soviet Union announced that they would do the same. They secretly appointed Sergei Korolev to be the director of the space program, and it would be held by their military. Eisenhower considered two main proposals to head the U.S. space program. The first, the Army's proposal, was to use V-2 rockets to develop the military technology and the space program in tandem, whereas the Naval Research Laboratory's proposal was to use Aerobee scientific rockets instead. As Eisenhower was the first president during the Cold War, he wanted to see mutual demilitarization throughout the entire world, which he expressed in his Chance for Peace address. For this reason, he went with the latter proposal as a sign of goodwill to meet that end. Early in the space race, Allen Dulles, then director of the CIA, recognized the propaganda value of being the first country to orbit a satellite. For this reason, the CIA gave a portion of its funds directly to Project Vanguard, and they also conducted multiple intelligence reports on the Soviet space program using their U-2 spy plane. The U-2 spy plane's imagery from flying over the Soviet Union was analyzed, and from this analysis they could glean the Soviet Union's missile capabilities as well as potential launch dates, including the Sputnik's launch within 2 weeks of the actual date. Unfortunately for Eisenhower and the United States, the Soviet Union's Sputnik 1 was the first artificial satellite launched into space on October 4, 1957. The launch sowed doubt into many Americans' minds in both the country's position and in Eisenhower's administration. Trying to get any good news from the situation, Eisenhower moved up Project Vanguard's next launch to December 6th and made it highly publicized. However, this launch was purely experimental and was using a brand new, untested rocket. With millions of Americans watching, Project Vanguard only rose a few feet off the launch pad before spectacularly failing. Any bad news from Sputnik's launch was now compounded in the minds of Americans. Even though Eisenhower rejected the U.S. Army's Project Explorer proposal over 2 years ago, JPL and Wernher von Braun continued to work on the project in secret. They sourced the satellite and attached it to the Juno 1 rocket. From there, they set up a test launch date under the guise that it was just another missile test, but after the launch was successful, they announced that the U.S. had finally had its first artificial satellite. After the success of Project Explorer, it became clear to Eisenhower that if he had gone with the military program first, then the U.S. might have been the first country to launch a satellite. At the very least, the U.S.'s current space program had to be completely overhauled, and Eisenhower broached to Congress about making a new civilian agency to helm it. A month later, NASA was created. Even though NASA had a few successes in the couple of years after it was created, Kennedy and the Democrats blamed Eisenhower's administration for falling behind the Soviet Union, creating a so-called missile gap, and allowing the Soviet Union to come ahead of America in terms of military might and technology. This led to Kennedy getting a very narrow win against Nixon in the 1960 election. After his victory, President Kennedy knew that Americans needed a new propaganda victory to renew confidence within the country. For this reason, he announced the goal of the space race was to reach the moon by 1970 and massively increased NASA's budget to do so. With his and Lyndon B. Johnson's policies, Apollo 11 was eventually able to land on the moon in 1969, securing the U.S.'s victory in the space race. Though Eisenhower's decision to not militarize the U.S.'s space program was definitely a failure within his time, over 60 years later, the answer is less clear. A lot of people respect his vision and for not wanting to militarize everything, and wanting to seek demilitarization throughout the world. Maybe his goal wasn't correct for his time, but it certainly was noble.